I've hosted 4,000 people. And when you look in kind of standard development and learning cultures, they say, okay, here are the 10, 12, maybe 8 essential leadership capabilities. If you want to be a leader, you need these. And then I looked at the people that I was hosting, and all I could think is that none of these people have these skills.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome to AI and the Future of Work. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Our community is growing. If you haven't yet joined the weekly newsletter, do it. You're missing out on additional fun facts and some clips that don't always make it into the weekly show. We will share a link in the show notes. We are all in this together, as you well know if you're a loyal listener. If you enjoy today's episode or any other, share it with just one friend. That's all we ask. They'll know that you care about using AI to make humans better. And you know what? If someone you know shared this with you, tell them thanks and pay it forward. If you leave a comment, I may share it in an upcoming episode like this one from loyal listener Blake in Nashville, great city, who's a health tech entrepreneur. Blake's favorite episode is from back in season 3 with Tim Galleri, managing director at Sierra Ventures, about how he funds AI companies and what most entrepreneurs get wrong. Cruelties, we'll share a link to that one. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly. And of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact. Today's fun fact comes from a new white paper from the World Economic Forum, where they discuss how physical AI is powering the new age of industrial operations. It describes how advances in industrial robotics are redefining automation at a time when the global economy is being shaped by rising complexity and workforce shortages. Breakthroughs in hardware, AI and vision systems are giving rise to physical AI, robotic systems capable of perception, reasoning, and autonomous action. 3 complementary robotic systems are emerging that will coexist in the future state: rule-based, training-based, and context-based robotics. Companies like Amazon and Foxconn illustrate how these innovations are already improving operations. Of course, we'll share a link to that full article in the show notes. My commentary: I enjoyed the white paper because I believe in the work of the World Economic Forum and feel physical AI is less of a technology story and more about culture, collaboration, and rethinking humanness at work. Work is no longer defined by hours or measured by how much non-work we sacrifice to get ahead. Increasingly, work is defined by output, ideas, and impact. Working alongside physical AI will make us more productive, but also force us to reconcile complicated relationships with non-human colleagues. Don't feel threatened. Think about your why and what you unconstrained could accomplish. We've all been supported by books, teachers, calculators, family, mentors. Physical AI is here to support you in ways we haven't been able to imagine. Now's the time to dream bigger about what it means to be your best self. Now, shifting to this week's great conversation. Gosh, I've been counting down like a year to have this guest on. So excited to introduce you to Jon Levy, who's a behavioral scientist and New York Times bestselling author, known for his work in trust, human connection, belonging, and influence. More than a decade ago, he founded the Influencers Dinner, a secret dining experience for industry leaders, ranging from Nobel laureates, Olympians, celebrities and executives, to artists and musicians. I was at an amazing one featuring a panel of Olympians. I told Jon that I'm still friends with many of the people I met there. These dinners developed into a community with thousands of members. Jon's also a thrill seeker who wrote about his outrageous adventures in his first book, The 2 a.m. Principle, Discover the Science of Adventure. His third book is a page-turner and was just published. It's called Team Intelligence: How Brilliant Leaders Unlock Collective Genius. We will be discussing it today. Jon has done so much, but you know what? One thing he hasn't done is appear on AI and the Future of Work. That's about to change. Without further ado, Jon, my friend, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the podcast. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about that illustrious background and how you got to doing what you do.
Oh, sure. So first of all, Dan, thank you so much for having me on and for your persistence. Uh, in the time since you approached me, I had my second child and things were a little crazy, but I'm so happy we could finally sit down together. So a bit about my background. I think the easiest way to start this off is to explain that I was so geeky in my childhood and so unpopular because it was like the 80s and nobody liked people who were into tech and Dungeons and Dragons and such. Nowadays, that they're tech billionaires and programmers, and that's how people create, then we all get really excited when we meet somebody who's an expert in AI or technology. But back then, I was so geeky. Uh, I needed to figure out a way to make friends. And so essentially, I became a behavioral scientist, hoping that if I understood human behavior, maybe I could develop meaningful relationships. And so I started researching trust and connection and all these kind of base elements. And to prove out my theories, I did something really weird. And Dan, you kind of pointed to this. I convinced people to come to my home, cook me dinner, wash my dishes, clean my floors, and then weirdly, they thanked me for the experience and asked if their friends could do it. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm just worried now that your listeners think that I'm luring people over to steal their kidneys or something like that.
That's the second version of the influencer series, presumably.
Yes,
Once
that's
you've lured them into a false sense of
the Law and
security.
Order version. Yeah. So what happens is I invite 12 people. They come and cook dinner together anonymously. And when they sit down to eat, they find out they're with Olympians and astronauts and Nobel laureates and everything. And so I've hosted over 400 of these dinners, probably over 4,000 guests. And companies had started coming to me trying to understand what actually allows their employees to connect with customers or with each other or for the C-suite to work together. And that led to my world of research and book writing. And what led me to meeting you.
So, John, you walk into these events and you're in a room full of strangers, and there's kind of a buzz because you kind of know about the series. But part of what's magical about the events is that everyone's a stranger, and so you're stripped of your whatever, your status, your title, the number of followers. It doesn't matter. You're just humans first. When you first started out with the series, was it intentional? I mean, how'd you create this vibe that
that's
just brings out the best in everyone?
So let's start off with we have about 100 events a year. Some are the dinners, some are salon experiences. So we have something called Inspired Culture, and that's much larger, right? So it's like 60 to 100 people. There were probably like 70 people at the event you attended. And then we surprised them with famous speakers or games or whatever it is to figure out what people do. And we just look for ways to connect people. In the early days, this is my late 20s, early 30s, the dinners, frankly, weren't nearly as impressive. And the salons after weren't salons. They were just parties where people got ridiculously drunk. And then one day I got an email from a famous, actually magician of all things. And he said, how dare you bring together the most influential people in our culture and then just get them drunk? Because, the status grew over time and I was still hosting an after party. And I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. But next time you have feedback, could you not email everybody at my company? He did like a send all. It was very frustrating. And what we ended up doing was building these salons. And the intent is that once people have attended the dinner, then they're on the inside. And that people have been mostly vetted, right? Then when people come back, it feels more like you're coming back for your old school reunion or something. You're excited to see the people you know, and you're excited to discover who else will be there. And when you end up in a conversation with somebody, you don't know if they're like, an Academy Award winner or a mathematician. So we recently had, if you Google highest IQ in the world, this dude, Francis, his photo shows up, and we had him sitting next to the guy who wrote the movies and directed Airplane, The Naked Gun, like all the movies that arguably you could say make us all stupider. But it was just amazing that those two people could be next to each other, next to an Olympian, next to, whatever, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. And so everybody is so overwhelmed by how impressive everybody else is that the egos kind of fly out the window.
I had that experience at the one that I attended. I was having a wonderful conversation with this very friendly couple, complete strangers to me. And they composed the scores for, I believe, Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King.
I think who you're talking about. They're an older couple.
They were kind of royalty.
Yeah.
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 So this is that couple are writing partners. They wrote
Yeah.
and created Newsies.
Yeah.
They did large portions of Tarzan, The Lion King, and Beauty and the Beast, was it? There was one other major one, but they wrote a lot of sections of the major Disney films. And they're just a delightful duo.
My kids are big into musical theater. And just for some cosmic timing thing, they had just finished performing Newsies on stage.
wow.
And so I was literally like prostrating at their feet, like
Yeah.
truly it was a meet your heroes kind of a moment. So that kind of thing happens all the time though, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, like, I've hosted 4,000 people. So it's just at dinners, and then at the salons, thousands more. So it's, frankly, nobody reports back, but I assume it just happens constantly. Yeah. And then all that kind of led to the business stuff, trying to understand how to help companies really connect and function best, and all the books and everything.
So 400 events, I'm sure a few stand out in your mind. I'm not asking you to pick your favorite kid, but something outrageous that happened or something that just pops in your mind as being super memorable.
Oh, wow. There was one dinner. There's a very famous behavioral scientist, probably the father of it, by the name of Dan Kahneman. And we had a British
Dan Kahneman.
Yeah, we had a British pop star there. And Dan must have been like 80 years old when he came. He was like this curmudgeon-y Jewish guy. And she took his hand, and they were sitting next to each other, and she had neon hair and like completely wild personality. Every time somebody would say what they did, she would slam her hand down, but she was holding his, and she'd go, "Oh my God, can you believe that this person's, whatever it is, or won this award?" And Dan, I was so worried for him because he's this fragile old man. I was worried that like every time she would slam her hand down, she would like break something. And my favorite photo of any dinner is a photo of her lipstick on his bald head, because it's like this neon pink or something like that. And what was really cool, a few people down, we were trying to guess what somebody did. And he goes, "Well, no, this is the person we were guessing. My name is Moran Surf. I'm a neuroscientist, and I used to be a professional hacker. I'd hack into banks and secure them. And on 2 occasions or 3 occasions, I actually physically went and robbed a bank to secure the banks." And what happened was, there's no way Dan would remember this, but years and years and years ago, when I was a bank robber, I emailed Dan Kahneman asking what I should do with my career. And he said, "You should become a neuroscientist." And so I did. And so, Dan, you changed my life. And it was so cool to see that the person that inspired his life was sitting a few seats away from him. And Dan Kahneman actually went to his wedding a few years later.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
If it weren't true, I'd question that one. You made that up on the spot. For those listeners who aren't familiar, that's Kahneman of Kahneman and Tversky, who are the founders of the field of behavioral economics.
Yeah. If you want, at the same dinner, there was a roboticist who we were guessing what she did, and she goes, "There's no way you would know this." And she turned to Bill Nye, the science guy who was there, and said, "You were the one that inspired me to go into sciences."
Wow.
And they became close friends too. So it was just a lovely.
That's kind of a mic drop.
Yeah, it was just a lovely evening. Anyway, yeah.
So, Jon, a lot of what you write about, is related to influence and what it means to be influential. Mm-hmm. I got to ask you kind of an offshoot of the topics you talk about a lot, which is, why should we care? Why does it matter if we're influential or not?
So influence is simply the ability to have an impact on an outcome, right? So, or a person. And so no matter what you want to achieve, whether it's like getting your kid into some special after school program or, I don't know, getting that raise or closing that deal. It all comes down to our ability to influence. Now, there's influence at scales, right? So if if you know Mark Zuckerberg, clearly very influential person, but he's not the person you need to influence to get your kid into that after school program. Right? Even if he called and made the request, people would just be very confused about it. So we want to understand what puts the odds in our favor, what actually has an impact, and what is a waste of time. And when we look at the things that actually matter, whether it's how to get our teams to function really well, or how to be an effective leader, or how to influence our kids to go brush their teeth, we want to understand the mechanics of all these things.
One of the big theses in team intelligence is kind of unpacking this fallacy of like the star talent, the alpha person, and in fact, teams have a different kind of intelligence. Maybe just talk us through the core thesis and also how you backed into that as the topic for the book.
So, how we landed on the topic of the book is that I've hosted 4,000 people. And when you look in kind of standard development and learning cultures, they say, okay, here are the 10, 12, maybe 8 essential leadership capabilities. If you want to be a leader, you need these. And then I looked at the people that I was hosting, and all I could think is that none of these people have these skills. They're not great at all of these things, but they've won the Nobel Prize. They've built billion-dollar companies. They've, achieved the greatest achievements our society has to offer and would be considered leaders by any standard other than these weird lists of capabilities. Some of these capabilities are like creates psychological safety. Sure, I'm sure Elon Musk is great at that. And so is, I don't know, Steve Jobs. Or capable of creating consensus among their leadership. Do you think that that's something those people do? No, those people just tell people what to do. And so these are clearly all things that are nice to have. They actually aren't the requirements of being a leader. And so what I wanted to do was understand what actually matters. What makes the people that I host so extraordinary? Are there commonalities, or is it something different running the show? And what we ended up discovering, I think, challenges every traditional view on leadership you could imagine, and also teams. And so we're really proud of the research. And Dan, you actually mentioned one that was really funny, which was like this alpha myth. So for you listeners out there, this idea that, the leader needs to be an alpha male who dominates everything and everyone, and that's how we accomplish things. It's like perpetuated by shows like Billions or Succession. It comes from an idiotic mistake that occurred in the 1970s when a wolf researcher was writing a book about wolves. And what he came across was research that suggested that when wolves interact with each other, they fight for dominance. So he wrote about it. The book ended up in pop culture. It was so popular, Supreme Court Justice wrote the New York Times book review for it. Isn't that crazy? Like, could you imagine if Scalia was like, John, I love your book. Can I write the New York Times review? It'd be very flattering. But like just completely unrealistic, at least not with today's view on politics. The interesting thing that happens is that he repeats the research in the 90s, discovers that he was wrong. The reason it looks like wolves are mostly fighting or dominating is because when they have offspring, then those offspring need to be controlled so they don't hurt themselves. So if you see your cub running off, the cubs can be really big. Then you might pin them down. Or if they start fighting with each other, they might pin them down. But it's not because they're trying to be aggressive, but because they're trying to protect their young. And what's generally found is, Dan, let's say you were ultra aggressive, right? Which clearly you're not, but let's say you were. Let's say you come across another group and you're like, ooh, I'm going to be the alpha. So what's the alpha move? Let's get into a fight. And so you get into these fights that are completely unnecessary. And then your pack members get injured and you become less capable of actually hunting and feeding and rearing young. And so the pack suffers when you have a overly dominant alpha. In fact, pack members will run away. And so it turns out that it is not a great strategy. If we look in our society at all the people who have the alpha attitude that didn't become ultra successful, they often end up in jail for getting into fights or abuse and things like that. It's just not healthy. And so it turns out that if we want to be really effective, there's a different collection of traits we want to look at. And that's kind of where it all started.
Confirming why every member of the current administration should have your book as required reading.
I think that, first of all, I'm flattered. I think that here's what's interesting about it. Can you have a dominant leader? Sure. But they need to be so damn talented in other stuff for it to be worth it for the company. So you look at a Steve Jobs. Although he had some toxic personality traits, his ability to create and produce results made it worth it for Apple to keep him on there. But then when you're really honest, what that means is that you have to create a team that knows how to buffer that behavior. You need a chief of staff that has the emotional intelligence to maneuver around that, and the creative director that knows how to push and when not to. And that person has to be right a lot in order for them to succeed, because when they're wrong, it could be devastating because they're not listening. So the answer is that even with situations where you have an alpha personality, it's the team that makes them functional.
So you brought up the wolves example, and you told me I was allowed to go way off script. So
yeah, go for it.
I want to hear you describe another anecdote. And the book is just full of these colorful stories told in just a very relatable way. John, why did the chicken cross the road?
Oh, God. The truth is the chickens never got to cross the road. They sat in cages for generation after generation. So I think what you're pointing to is this thing called the super chicken problem, which is when we look at teams and performance and organizations, there's this not funny, I'd say kind of wild story.
Poignant.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the save. Poignant story. Several decades ago, there was a popularly bred chicken called the DeKalb XL. It was like this super chicken that could outlay any other chicken out there. It was like a massive producer. But it was bred for pure productivity. And at a certain point, when you're breeding for pure productivity, the only way you can become more productive is by getting resources from others. And so they developed this habit of pecking at each other and hurting each other, and even killing one another. And an evolutionary biologist by the name of William Muir said this is complete insanity. We need to create birds that produce a lot of eggs and are pro-social. They can be around each other. So what he did was he crossbred a bird, put groups of them in cages together, and then he would weigh the total amount of egg produced by each coop, right? And the coops that did really well, he would rebreed for another generation, and so on and so forth. And after 6 generations, he ended up with these super teams that could massively produce. But for it to be useful, he would have to compete against the DeKalb XLs, these super chickens. And when they put them head to head for a year, what they discovered was that the super team demolished the DeKalb XLs, mostly because the DeKalb XLs had pecked each other to death and there were only 3 left. And Muir called these his KGB, his kinder, gentler birds. And what was discovered is that when you breed for 2 characteristics or reward 2 characteristics, pro-social behavior and productivity, you end up with teams that can work together. The KGB were healthy and well-feathered and massively producing. And that's just a healthier way to produce eggs rather than tortured chickens.
Such a great metaphor. So you're talking to a bunch of insanely ambitious entrepreneurs who want to change the world, but may not be experts in how to build teams that change the world. What can we learn from your research about, what someone who on an individual level is uncommonly talented to help them understand how to build a team that, is the KGB of the roost, so to speak?
So the answer is that we're used to rewarding individual behavior, to find the stars that shine the brightest. The problem is that when you cross about the 50 to 60% talent mark for top talent on a team, the team massively underperforms. And that's because of the too much talent problem. You see, this effect exists in basketball and soccer, but actually not in baseball. And the reason is that there's no way to be selfish in baseball. But when you go to basketball, there's only one stat that predicts a player's salary, and that's how much a player scores. So they're all incentivized to shoot the ball regardless of if it's a good shot or not. They're incentivized to be selfish. There's also only one stat that predicts an effective coach. That is the increase in the rate of passing under that coach. Meaning, Dan, if you're my coach and you get me to go from passing 60% of the time to 80% of the time, now at this higher level, the ball can get to the person who has the best chance of scoring, which also means that I've gone from thinking about myself to thinking about the team. The role of the leader is to maximize the intelligence of the team so that it can solve problems as quickly as possible. And the first characteristic of that is that we have to be aligned around the same goals. We need to make sure that I, as somebody on the team, knows what the absolute goal is. Then we have to understand how our team fits into that larger corporate goal, how my role fits into the team, and then how my personal goals will be achieved through my work with that team. And when all of those things are aligned, then selfishness goes out the window. Now we have a team that can actually get something done.
And ego, presumably, as well, right?
Well, yeah, I think that it reduces it significantly. Ego will never disappear. We're in a pretty narcissistic era in human history between social media and isolation and all these other factors.
But that's how a Phil Jackson can build a legendary team.
Yeah. He was known for, until Jordan had a team around him that could play as a team, he wasn't winning championships.
Right.
And that's
Jordan
what we need
without Scottie Pippen wasn't going to win championships.
Yeah. And that's the problem is that, he was a singular great talent, but that doesn't mean that that's enough. Talent is table stakes. You want to play at the pro level, talent is table stakes. But in a team sport, it's the ability to coordinate and work together that defines the win, not pure talent.
In a business setting, not to go too deep into the NBA examples, but how do I, as a leader, find a Shane Battier? I love that anecdote. I was so relatable, for all of us who followed him since his Duke days, and then, success with the Spurs under Popovich. But tell us about, what's special about Shane Battier.
So researchers from, I think that was led by Brigham Young, were trying to understand, are there employees that multiply everybody else's results? And the best that they could find was looking at basketball stats because they're so clear. What they found was that there's an entire collection of players they call spillover players, or I call glue players, that caused a multiplier effect. I think they calculated about 1.6 times. Now, these players are not great at shooting or stealing or getting rebounds, but somehow when you put them on the team, everybody else performs better. In Battier's case, if you look at the top players in the league, there's something called a plus minus, which is how many additional points do you expect when that person's playing a game? And what you find is that with the top 5 players, you get a plus 12 to a plus 8. Think Steph Curry and LeBron James and so on. Battier, at his peak, this is what they would call him the no stats all-star. At his peak would be a +6. And that's because when he'd get on the court, sometimes they'd call him Lego because everybody else would click into position. And so suddenly what you discover is that the top players in terms of impact don't need to be the top scorers. Battier had 3 characteristics which were extraordinary. One is he was incredibly team-oriented. He'd be the only player that probably said, "Take me out, coach." He'd say, literally, bench me because I need to be rested, or I think this other player should go up against this person in defense. He cared more about the team than himself. The second is he was incredibly forward-thinking. He took the actions nobody asked him to and didn't occur to anybody else. There's a stat book on every player in the league that tells you where their shooting percentage is like from each spot. He would memorize the opposing team before the game so that he would know that if he pushed you just into the right place, it would reduce your stats by a few percentage points. And this, over the course of a game or over the course of a season, adds up to a ton of points taken away from the opponent. The third thing he was is an individual with incredibly high emotional intelligence. And when we look at the single greatest predictor of a team's intelligence, it's not IQ or average IQ of the team members or how much people liked each other. It was the number of women on the team. And it's not because they're women, it's because women index higher on emotional intelligence. What Battier brought was the ability to understand where to push an idea, how to maneuver between team members, how to create connections between them so that trust is high. And because of all these characteristics, since he wasn't competing with LeBron or Dwayne Wade or Chris Bosh, he could actually say things to them and they might listen because they knew he cared more about the team than himself. He was seen as fundamentally benevolent. So if you actually ever watch a game, you'll notice he was speaking far more than anyone else on the court, passing information and updating them. And as a byproduct, after he joined the Heat, the team shifted and they won 2 back-to-back championships. He's an incredible guy because he's a no stats all-star.
Fascinating. And again, such a great metaphor. So this podcast is about AI and the future of work. And I frequently say on this show and elsewhere, work will change more in the next 3 years than it has in the previous 300, since the first industrial revolution. And one of the first things that's being disrupted, reimagined is culture and team composition. And it's a certainty that if team members are not feeling threatened or a little bit destabilized already by what is or may become of AI, they will be soon. How would you weave that theme? I know a lot has happened in the world of AI at work since you started writing the book. How would you weave this incursion of AI into culture and teams into some of the lessons that you share in the book?
So I think the first question is, what is the role of AI on a team? Currently, we're not at the point where it's a full team member, right? And who knows if we'll end up there, probably at some point. But I think we need to understand that that's almost irrelevant. And the reason I say that is that most of the time when we talk about AI, we talk about it replacing or accelerating a process. I don't know if that process makes even any sense to accelerate or if it should just be replaced with a different process. That's kind of where most people are looking. I think what the opportunity to look at is in asking, why do teams exist? They exist because certain problems are too big to tackle by ourselves. And so the goal of a team is to have the highest intelligence possible, to solve that problem as quickly as possible. So instead, we need to ask, how can AI technology, as they currently are, actually accelerate that? And I would argue in 3 basic ways. Number 1, alignment. I believe that you should have an agent on every call that ensures that what you're talking about is consistent with the actual goal. They should know the company's goals, each other team's goals, your goals including your personal goals. And those KPIs or OKRs, so that as you're having a conversation, it says, hey, just so you're aware, goals have changed for this other team in the org, and now you guys are heading in conflicting direction. Maybe you should have a call with them to ensure that. Or, hey, is this still your goal? Because the current strategy you're discussing doesn't align with that. It won't achieve that. You may need to speak to accounting or finance or whatever it is to review budgets, because with tariffs as high as they are, whatever they are, you're not going to be able to accomplish this. And that way we make sure that everybody's heading in the right direction. There should be a second agent that gives us attention. And what I mean by that is intelligent teams have what's called bursty communication. They come together, they might argue it out, but when they're done, everybody knows what next steps are and where to go to find information, and then they go their separate ways so that they can actually get work done without distracting one another. An agent should exist that tracks all the conversations, the conclusions, and tracks resources so that you know where to go to for what. It also should help with increasing psychological safety. What does that mean? You're on a call with me and 5 other people. You get a little notification that says, Dan, it seems that Susie wants to say something, but you've been talking a long time. Maybe you give her some communication space. Essentially, it gives you emotional intelligence support so that you don't have to be overly focused on everything. This way, no matter your level of emotional intelligence, you can have the EQ of a superstar. The third thing is resources. Teams that have a greater variety of resources outperform. But we do not make the implicit explicit. I don't know who you know, where your contacts are, how close you are, all that. But if I have an agent constantly running, cross-referencing your LinkedIn, your schedule, all these other factors, and it says, oh, Dan, I'm trying to sell to Dropbox. It will surface, hey, didn't you have a call 3 months ago with Clive from Dropbox? Right? So it tracks resources so you don't have to have a memory. And it cross-references things so that you get to your solution fastest. Oh, you're talking about how to restructure this part of your business. You should talk to this division. They just did something similar.
So what I hear is that AI augments the people on the teams in a way that is explicitly non-threatening,
yeah,
which is counter to the common narrative.
But we have to build those agents, and they have to have access to data, which means that they have to be integrated into Salesforce and HubSpot and also, whatever other technologies people are using, from Fathom for note-taking or to your QuickBooks to know, oh, your team is, there isn't that much money in the bank, whatever it is. But that way it can cross-reference information very quickly and give real answers and direct the team. So it accelerates the process, makes the team smarter.
Unbelievably, we're out of time. We're over time, but I'm not letting you off the hot seat without answering one last important question. You give good coaching, good advice. And one of the attributes of Silicon Valley where I sit right now is that we're either great or awful, depending on your perspective, at navel gazing. And one of our own company just up the road from where I am right now, Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, famously recently acquired all of or part of weird acqui-hire thing, a company called Scale AI, $14 billion, ostensibly to get the then CEO of Scale AI, a guy named Alexander Wang, to head up AI at Meta. Classic, alpha leader, name brand, and then the combination of Wang and Zuckerberg have been building a team of $100 million plus kind of alpha talent, world-changing talent around Wang, and the stakes couldn't be higher, the expectations couldn't be higher. From reading your book, it has all the attributes of a team that together may be susceptible to not generating the most team intelligence. What's your coaching to Mark Zuckerberg if he was sitting in front of you and he said, hey, how can I how can I optimize this team's intelligence? What should I be doing?
So I think we need to understand one critical element. Team intelligence matters when there's high task interdependence, meaning that my role is intrinsically intertwined in yours. If these are researchers all working on their own thing and there's no overlap, one is the foremost expert on visual models for, identification. Another one is trying to figure out compression, another, whatever it is. And their labs are separated from each other. Then you probably need a workplace psychologist to make sure they just don't step on each other's toes when you're dealing with office space or interactions or trying to hire somebody from a different division or something like that. Right? I don't think that that's going to be a huge issue. If you want this dream team to actually be able to work together, holy cow, you should also offer me $100 million and I'll make it happen. That's my recommendation to Mark. Oof. Get ready to write a big check, because if failure is not an option, then you need some glue players in there. People with a high emotional intelligence. Maybe it's hire really great chiefs of staff for all of them to communicate with each other, to back channel and make sure that the egos don't get in each other's way. But they need
leaders like Zuckerberg are famous for creating, you indicated earlier, and I agree, zero psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, famously, right? Silicon Valley will be proud of the fact that, companies will fire the bottom X%. So it is.
Here's what I'll say. Yeah. People might talk a lot of trash. I will tell you that having done work with people at Meta, they are consistently some of the smartest, kindest, and most genuine people you will meet. They do a fantastic job hiring. My hunch is that Zuckerberg is probably pretty insulated from most of the company. And as a byproduct, although he might set the style, I don't know if it's the same thing that people feel day to day. I think the culture ends up coming from other places.
Mm-hmm. But there's enough emotional IQ throughout the organization.
I think people actually really care about each other there.
Yeah.
It's easy to talk trash about a lot of things. And you might have issues, or people might have issues with their business model, the impact that they've had on a whole slew of issues, right? That is not the topic of this podcast. But I would look at the actual culture, what people say. And I'm not saying they bleed Meta the way that like T-Mobile people bleed magenta, right? But you do see a real sense of cultural cohesion there. I don't know what it's like today specifically, but in general.
So the moral of the story is, Mark, I know you're listening. Jon is ready for $100 million offer, and he'll guarantee you a successful culture. Is that right?
No, I'm ready for a $100 million offer. I'll probably say no. Let's be honest. I've very, like, my aspirations for being absurdly rich don't match the lack of desire to deal with massive egos that are a pain in the butt.
Well said.
But I don't also know if these people do have massive egos. Lots of researchers can be very quiet and dedicated to their work and just don't want to be bothered by politics. Other people want to dominate, right? That's one of these things. There's no general unified example. You look at the difference between Satya, Mark, and
Elon.
Sundar and Elon. These are wildly different personalities. There's no unified characteristics other than that they're probably passionate about creating the future.
Jon, this has been brilliant. Went by way too fast. Please take me up on the offer. Come back more frequently.
Thank you, Dan.
We don't need to wait until your next book.
Much appreciated.
Pitch the book. Where can the audience get it?
It's literally available everywhere. So you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Books A Million. I mean, literally, if you just search Team Intelligence, How Brilliant Leaders Unlock Collective Genius, or Team Intelligence, and my name, Jon Levy, Jonlevy, you'll find it. It's a fun book. It's been endorsed by 2 Nobel laureates, the Princess of Holland, the commander of the International Space Station. It's like, and it's a fun read. And then if anybody wants to get in touch with me, just drop by my website, jonlevy.com, Jonlevy, and I respond to just about every email that comes in, unless it's bonkers crazy.
Jon, this is brilliant. Great work as always, and thanks for hanging out.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Well, that's all the time and more than we have for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from People Rain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.